course, or first chapter in a series of courses that we're going to be offering to all our members. And the first one is on Introduction to Airport Economics. And basically the idea here is to give you, an outline, a high-level view on the subject of airport economics. One of the reasons, well, the main reason why I decided to do this is because, as you very well know, we are going through a very, very unusual time. And this situation that we are living actually got me thinking if the fundamentals of airport economics and the air transport industry is going to be, it's going to change. I was going to say it's going to be challenged. It's of course being challenged, but the important thing is it going to change? So I thought, why don't we just review the fundamentals on airport economics? And as time goes by, we decide if it is indeed changing, if it is changing for good from now onwards. So without further ado, let's get started. So let me see. Okay. Click. Okay. So what we're going to be talking today are a number of things. First of all, we will be talking about a background to the airport business, to the airport industry, not so much the industry, the business. We will be referring to traffic and demand. We'll talk about revenues, we'll talk about costs, and of course we'll talk about profitability. And in the middle of all this, we'll be debunking probably a few myths and a few things that I think is important for you to be aware of. We actually told your CEOs, your HR departments, to invite for this session those of you, in particular those of you who are new or who perhaps are not so familiar with the fundamental economic principles driving our industry. So apologies for those of you who already know these, but maybe, hopefully, even those of you who know a lot about airport economics will find out things that are new. The first thing I want to say is that transport infrastructure, as you very well know, is key for the competitiveness of a territory. And that is absolutely, basic, but I think it's good to see, to understand that indeed it is not just a phrase that we say because it sounds good, but if you will look into in history, for example, if we go back to the 15th and 16th century, the top left is a picture of the city of Seville. At that time, in the 16th century, Seville was the richest town in the Western world. And it was based on commerce with the newly discovered American continent. And as you can see in this picture, it is very prominently shown the fact that there are lots of ships, because hopefully, luckily for the city of Seville, actually it has a river that actually takes you all the way to the middle of the city, the river Guadalquivir. And this picture is basically showing that the power of this city is very much based on commerce, and that commerce is possible because of the availability of transportation, in this case, sea transportation. Going fast forward to the 19th and 20th centuries, the emergence of railways. And for example, the top right picture is a picture of the city of Chicago in the 1930s. And Chicago became a booming city as a result of railways. The fact that it was right in the middle between the northeast of the United States and the newly developed and recently colonized western part of the United States actually meant that these railways actually were hubbing, at Chicago. And that led to the emergence of Chicago as a great city. Bottom right, the age of of cars, the 20th century, starting from right after World War II, the importance of automobiles in the United States. That's a photo of Los Angeles. If you didn't have a good road network, you couldn't actually position yourself. And then fast forward to now, and that's a photo of Atlanta airport. And we all know that without a good connectivity, air connectivity, it is impossible to really make a mark. And the fact that Atlanta has such a huge and impressive airport infrastructure means that many companies actually decide to be based in that city because of the connectivity that it affords. Okay, let's go on. All right, so that is all very well, but what about the airport business? Because airports have been around ever since aviation started in the early 1900s. But airports as a business is a relatively new phenomenon. Basically, we can actually almost put a date to the emergence of airports as businesses, and that is 1986. On that year, the UK, the United Kingdom, in the midst of the privatization mode that actually was really taking hold in that country, the government of the United Kingdom passed the Airports Act in 1986. And immediately as a result of this Airports Act, in 1987, BAA, what was known as British Airports Authority, was listed, was floated on the stock exchange in London. So that actually marked the beginning of airports as businesses. As an industry, it was already there, as businesses, as organizations that had to make a profit, that the government itself said that for you to exist, you actually have to make a profit. And it was not just for the BAA, the British Airports Authority, but also for all other airports in the United Kingdom. The success of that privatization actually caught on in the rest of the world, and as a result, we actually saw the emergence of airports as something that you actually wanted to invest in. And today, in Latin America, we have the highest proportion of privatized airports in the world. Leaving aside if it is good or if it is bad, if it's actually been given good returns or not, it is a fact. Today, airports are seen as businesses, and the origin goes back to the Airports Act of 1986. Another thing that I wanted to share with you that I think is very interesting is to consider the interrelationship between different aspects of the industry. We have, on the one hand, regulation, which is absolutely fundamental for the thriving of airlines. We have airlines, of course, as a result of regulation, and we will point out a few things as a result of that. We have technology, which plays a fundamental role in what is actually happening today. Airports themselves are going through a very interesting process, as I was just mentioning a moment ago, and of course the transformation of tourism. And all these things are interrelated. And I just wanted to point out to one thing. The success, the real success of low-cost carriers is very much linked to the internet. And the success of low-cost carriers and the success of the internet has given rise to the specialization of the tourism industry. The fact that today, any of us, well, not today, actually, unfortunately, because of COVID, but right before COVID, you know, in January this year, we could actually sit down in front of our computers and decide to organize an adventure holiday in the northern part of Chile. You know, it's possible because of the internet, and actually enjoying that sort of holiday at a reasonable price is due to the availability of the internet, the availability of low-cost carriers, and the fact that there have been specialist companies that have become because of the fact of those two aspects, the low cost and the internet. Absolutely fascinating, okay? And I'm not going to dwell much more on this, but basically what I want to do in this slide is to show all that relationship, okay? And, you know, all these different aspects that I'm going to be talking about in a minute, all by themselves are disciplines. I mean, we can actually have a huge number of presentations on each of these topics, but I'm just in this presentation just pointing out to you what you know, the relationships and the driving forces. So, what are some of the key characteristics of airport economics? And we will actually talk in detail. And as I say, each of these by themselves, you know, we can have several presentations. I don't know if Francisco, if you are moving the presentations backwards and forwards.
Yes, I'm trying to put your camera. That's why.
Okay.
And now they can see you. Sorry, Rafa.
Okay, so thank you. So please don't be scared, because now you can see me. So, yes, what are some of the characteristics of airport economics, of the economics of the airport industry? The first one is that airports actually have a highly diverse value chain. What does that mean? Well, it means that the airport business is not just the provision of a runway, which is at its basis, the core function. That's what it is, to provide a runway and to allow the transition between the air mode to the ground mode or the sea mode. That is actually the fundamental. But actually, any self-respecting airport in the world, actually, if you look into it, you will see that it has many activities that are not necessarily directed or linked to the aviation industry. You have, of course, the aviation industry that plays a fundamental role. You have shops, you have restaurants, you have advertising, you have car rentals, you have office buildings, you have so many things that are not necessarily directly related to aviation. And in some airports, those who are lucky enough to be in the right location, and the government allows them to actually excel in thriving the business, actually very often have activities that are completely independent of aviation. I'm thinking of the concept of the airport city. For example, in the city of Amsterdam in the Netherlands, the activity that goes on there, the airport actually could shut down and a lot of activity would still go on. I was reading this morning in Zurich, there is a new development called the Circle that is basically a real estate development, which actually takes advantage of the good connections that the airport has developed. Not only air connections, but also, of course, also ground connections. Actually, the busiest ground transportation hub in Switzerland and in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, are at the airport. And that is linked to what I call the highly diverse value chain. Of course, demand plays a fundamental role, and we will talk a little bit more about demand later. Location, not only is demand, is actually the location. Where are you located? Because the location, as I was just saying before, gives rise to many opportunities. Airline policies determine fundamentally the economic characteristics of airports. The decision by an airline to fly to this particular airport is a good example. The decision by an airline to establish a hub is actually a decision that is beyond the direct control of an airport. A hub is an airline operational model, not an airport decision. An airline has to develop a hub. An airport by itself cannot have a hub. You can, as an airport, develop the infrastructure, but it's up to the airline to establish those connections. Capital investments, that actually has a huge impact on the profitability chain cycle of an airport. And of course, very, very, very important, economic regulation. Economic regulation is determines very much what an airport can do, okay? The incentives that an airport may or may not have to develop some activities, or even the economic regulation can determine if an airport is interested in growing traffic, which sounds bizarre, but actually there are some countries where if you actually grow too much, your concession actually may be cut short. And so the question is, am I interested in growing traffic? Which is something that many governments should pay a lot of attention because, as you very well know, airport operators and destinations are interested in growing traffic. But in some cases, economic regulation actually doesn't make it very attractive to do so. All right, so let's go on. Oops. I don't know. Here we are. Of course, there are many different types of airports. Just wanted to mention some of the main types. You have origin and destination airports. Very important distinction here. It's not the same to be an airport on an island in the Caribbean as it is to be JFK. As an airport in the Caribbean, you depend on what happens on what happens outside your island. Depends on how attractive you are and how much disposable income is available for those tourists in Europe or in the United States or in Canada. Hence the importance of understanding if your airport is a destination or if it is an origin. A hub airport, as we were just mentioning a moment ago. International domestic, it will actually tell you if you can actually have duty-free shops or not. A low-cost or a full-service carrier airport. Emirates, for example, one of the things that they actually always ask for is the availability of a lounge, and if possible, their own lounge. Okay, so do you have the infrastructure to do that? A cargo airport has different characteristics and different drivers than a passenger airport. You know, very few only cargo airports in the world, but there are some. Okay, so this is very important, very interesting to understand what type of airport you are, and also understand that if you want to become, say, a cargo airport, what is it that you have to do? Or does it make sense for you to aim to become a cargo airport? And we will see that in a moment. By the way, Francisco, whenever you want to put the polls, do that, okay? You let me know. Okay, so let's take a brief look at what the airport industry in Latin America looked like in 2019 and 2018. Just basically some numbers here, okay? I'm not going to dwell on those. We will, of course, give you a copy of the presentation. But let's go and launch now the first poll, okay? So what do you think? Air cargo handled at the top 5 airports in Latin America represents what percentage of the total cargo in this part of the world? What do you think? Okay.
Okay, we have 16. Okay. Yes, I think we can finish it now.
Very good. Very interesting. Very interesting. Thank you very much, Francisco. So most people think that
now.
Yeah. So 43% of you believe that the top 5 airports handle more than about 25% of the total, and 10% believe that. 38%, 10% of the total. Okay, so that's very interesting. So the great majority believe that up to 25%. So we will see in a moment what is the case. So let's go on. So just give me a couple of slides. So what does LAC, Latin America and the Caribbean, represent in the world? So as you can see, in terms of passengers, we represent 7% of the world total. In terms of cargo, we represent 7% as well. And in terms of movements, we also represent approximately 9%. So, you know, around 7-9% of the world activity is here in Latin America. This is just for your information. Okay, so can I go back? One more. What happened? All right, so what are the drivers of demand? So demand for an airport, remember, this is not demand for, in general, for air transportation. This is demand for a particular airport. It's very much based on the destination, what the destination has to offer, okay? This is actually very interesting because very often people say, you know, oh, you know, we have a very, you know, the airport has to be very attractive and so on and so forth. Of course, that's very important. You know, that's in order to make it very pleasant for the passengers. But we mustn't forget that passengers fly to our airport not to stay in our airport. They are coming to our airport because they're going to a final destination. Okay, that is very, very important. Okay, to understand and understand what are the characteristics of that final destination, because that is what will shape what we offer, or will have a lot to say or a lot of influence on what happens in the airport. Of course, as I was saying before, the economic conditions, the GDP growth, the disposable income drives demand, the ticket prices, and the airline strategy, as I was saying before. Okay, let's go on. Okay, and as you can see, this is the evolution of passenger traffic over the last since the last 20 years. Okay, and as you can see, there have been ups and downs as a result of mainly recessions, the dot-com recession, the Great Recession, some, you know, impacts there with the SARS outbreak. Of course, the big question is what is going to happen in 2020, okay? And, not to scare you, but I mean, we forecast that traffic for the total of 2020 will probably fall by 50%. Well, in other words, sorry, it will be 50% of last year's traffic, a tremendous decline. Never in the history of aviation we've seen anything like that. By the way, this is actually shown in index numbers. Okay, so let me just go forward because I don't want to dwell on too much. Let me show you this slide. Once again, this is actually shown in index numbers, the evolution of traffic in Latin America since the year 2000. And it's very interesting, I find this slide, because we all know that traffic has been growing quite healthily, but what has happened with cargo and with movements? As you can see, movements actually have not really grown that much. And that is because airlines have had to adjust as a result of the previous crisis to be much more moderate in their offer. And of course, also they've actually introduced larger aircraft. And as a result of that, that is actually shown here. Passengers per movement actually have gone up tremendously in Latin America. Actually, the average number of passengers per aircraft is almost double, actually double today than what it was in the year 2000. That means larger aircraft and higher load factors. Very interesting. I don't know if you were aware of that, but actually that's a very interesting characteristic of the industry right now. And so let's have an answer to the question that we just threw at you. So I think that you were saying that the great majority of you believe that the highest, the top, I think it was the top 5 or top 10, I was asking. So as you can see here, the top 5 airports in Latin America in the year 2015 handled 44% of traffic, of the total traffic in Latin America. And if we look at the top 10 airports in Latin America, they handled 61%. Now, this tells us something very interesting. Of course, I'm focusing on cargo, but I mean the same thing with movements and passengers. But this actually tells us something very interesting. It should tell us that whenever an airport wants to develop its cargo business, and I'm sure that you've probably heard this, traffic is not doing, passenger traffic is not doing very well, we want to attract cargo. How easy it is to attract cargo? Well, it is not that easy. And this actually is an example. This actually gives you evidence that it is actually damn difficult if the top 10 airports in Latin America handle more than half of the cargo. Whatever is left has to be shared among more than 200 airports. So, a lot of room for thought, okay? All right, so I think time is going by very quickly. So revenue drivers, okay? So what is driving revenue, okay? So on the one hand, we have demand, traffic volume, okay? The more volume we have, the more revenue we generate. On the other hand, we have the type of passengers. As you very well know, it's not the same to have holiday makers as it is to have, visiting friends and family, and it is to have business people. On the other hand, we also have the retail and services opportunities. Have we as an airport developed all those retail and food and beverage opportunities? Have we as an airport developed the real estate opportunities? Do we have the land to develop the real estate opportunities? And then, once again, very important, what does economic regulation let us or incentivizes us to do? Because there may be a situation whereby I, as an airport, have to pay so much of my revenues to the government that I have a disincentive to develop some of these non-aeronautical opportunities. Once again, food for thought.
Rafael, we have a poll here.
Yeah, okay,
let me show it. Launch polling. Okay, so time to ask you again what you think about what is the largest component of aeronautical revenues.
So is it cargo activity? This is aeronautical revenues. Is it the landing charges? What makes the most money? What is the largest component of aeronautical revenues? Okay, very good.
Okay, we have 26
excellent
answers. I will end the polling and share the results.
Very good. Excellent. Very good. So we will see in a moment. Okay. Oops. Where are we? Okay.
Sorry.
All right.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So yeah, are we okay here? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Very good. So okay, I will skip this one because time is going by, and I will just go to the distribution of revenue. So first of all, let's talk about where do airports make money from. Okay, there are two types of revenues. Okay, we have aeronautical, straightforward. Those are the ones that are linked directly to air transport operations. And then what we have is what we call non-aeronautical revenues, which is everything else. Shops, the coffees, the restaurants, the real estate opportunities, and so the advertising. And what I wanted to show you here is that this is comparison of what happens in Latin America and what happens in the rest of the in the total for the world. And you can see that for the world total, non-aeronautical revenues actually represent approximately 40% of the total revenue. In Latin America, it's 29%. So this would suggest, I mean, there are many caveats, of course, but it would suggest that we still have some room for growth. Okay, so that's actually the message here. There seems to be potential for more non-aeronautical revenue activity in our airports. Let's go on to the next one. So, if we look at the aeronautical revenues that we were talking about, where is it coming from? Is it coming from the passenger charges? And you were absolutely right. The great majority of revenues, of non-aeronautical revenues, is from passenger charges. In the case of Latin America, it's staggering. It's 68% of the total is passenger charges. And landing charges only represents 10%. And the rest is everything else. Now, this is very important because of what we are going to see in a moment, which has to do, as you are very familiar with, the fight that we have, or the dispute or the disagreement that we have with the airlines. You know, airports are expensive, you know, it costs us a lot of money. Well, in the case of Latin America, the landing charge is not the issue, okay? And we will see in a moment what this means. So, as you know, we have landing charges, we have passenger charges, we have security charges, and so on and so forth. Directly passenger-related charges represent 80% of the aeronautical revenues in Latin America. Way more than in the rest of the world. Now, the slide says, who pays? Well, the passenger pays for everything. The passenger pays for the airport, the passenger pays for the airline, the passenger pays for everything. But the important thing here is, what is the airline paying? Well, the airline is paying the aircraft-related charges. And that is very important because that has an impact or not on the airline finances. You can argue that high passenger charges may be a deterrent for demand or what have you, but the airlines themselves are only paying 18%, or actually are billed 18% directly. Actually, we build everything to the airlines, but actually, if you look at a ticket, an airline ticket, it should actually break down what are passenger charges and what else, okay? And they should only show, I mean, those passenger charges and passenger taxes, okay? Although here we are not talking about taxes, okay? Very important. We are not talking about taxes. We are talking about charges. In other words, what we are charging passengers for the use of airport infrastructure. Very, very important slide here.
Sorry, Rafael, just before, if you can go back just a second for the next poll. Let me put it.
Oops.
Now I.
Okay, no, that's okay. Okay.
Sorry, let me put just before going to that one, let me. Share.
It's very strange, guys, to be talking to you without seeing you. First time ever for me.
Okay, Now
anyway, so in relation to what I was just talking about, what airport charges represent what percentage of airline costs? Because this is actually the dispute, okay? What do you think? Do they represent 4%, 6%, 10%?
Okay, 5 more seconds to go. And we have now 28.
Okay, very good.
Okay, I will
All right, very good. Very good. Interesting. Okay, so let's see. Oops, let's see.
Now you can. Okay.
I cannot see. Okay, I cannot see. Let's see. Okay, so if we, this one. So look at this, very interesting. This is by IATA. In the case of IATA, they say that Latin America and the Caribbean, it represents less than 4%. Okay? And according to ICAO, for the whole world, landing and airport charges represent 3.8% of airline operating costs. Very, very interesting. Very interesting. So once again, I think this is a very important slide because, as you very well know, there is always this complaint by airlines, airports are expensive. Well, actually, it only represents 3.8% of airline operating costs. And actually, very interesting too, that percentage actually has been declining over time. And once again, this is not even ACI numbers. These are ICAO numbers. As you can see, it's been progressively going down, okay? The 3.8, 4%. Very interesting. I thought that, I wanted to share this with you. Okay, now, non-aeronautical revenues, and I want to speed up because we're already 37 past the hour. Nothing new here. You probably knew that the retail concessions represents a large proportion of the total. Food and beverage, contributes a lot. Car parking, okay. I mean, there are huge differences, as you know, between, say, if it is a Caribbean airport, car parking is very small. If it is, an airport in a capital city, that represents much more. But this is just an idea of big numbers for the region, okay? Now, the important thing here is that, and this is one of the important slides as well, the larger you are as an airport, the more opportunities you should have to generate non-aeronautical revenue. And this is a beautiful slide. You can see how, the airports are listed by size, and, you can see it by yourself. More and more percentage of non-aeronautical revenue is generated the larger the airport becomes. I just wanted to show you also, for your interest, the difference between the duty-free concession revenue. So this is only looking at duty-free sales in airports in our region as compared to global. Now, $4.6 per passenger, per international passenger versus 2.57. Does this mean that we can do better? Well, maybe we can do better, but it is true also that the global figure is very much influenced by Asia Pacific, where that number is actually almost double, or if not double. I actually can share that with you if you are interested. Okay, let's carry on. Okay, so now we move on to costs, characteristics, and drivers. Very important to have this in mind too. Operating costs at an airport are largely fixed. No matter how much traffic you have, the operating costs are there because you have to light the entire terminal, you have to cool the entire terminal, you need the same number of firefighters, no matter if there is a lot of traffic or very little traffic, because that comes according to the category of your airport. So that is a very important message. Operating costs are largely fixed, okay? However, the unit cost decline with size, and we will see that in a moment, okay? That's very, very important, okay? Declining unit costs. You should see that happening in the long term at your airport. Now, CapEx, very important, as you very well know, very expensive to build at an airport to provide more capacity, is driven by peak hour demand. And as I was saying at the very beginning, we could have lengthy conversations about any of these topics. And I invite you to write to us to ask to have webinars like this one to look into these specifics, okay? And another very important point is that, as you know, investments, CapEx investments are generally large in terms of the amount and lumpy. In other words, you don't increase your terminal building by 5%. It doesn't make any sense. You actually increase it by 20%, 25%, whatever, okay? And that means that these are very important investments, okay? So these are what the drivers and of cost, of airport costs. Now, I'm not going to dwell on these. Not a surprise that personal expenses represents the highest proportion, okay, of airport costs. But there's actually something here that is hidden away, and not hidden away. You can see communications, utilities, energy, and waste that represents 6% for the total of the region. But those of you in island nations, and as many of you know, I used to run airports in an airport in Jamaica. That 6%, actually, in the case of Jamaica, is far, far higher than that, almost to a par with personal expenses. So that's why I don't want to dwell too much on this slide because of the huge differences, okay? We can skip this one too, okay? And let's look at this one. This one is very, very, very important, which is linked to the unit cost. As I was saying to you, and this is my own saying, I say you have to be surfing down the unit cost curve, okay? The unit cost, in other words, the total operating cost divided by the number of passengers gives you this slide, this graph. And it shows that small airports actually carry much larger unit costs. This is fundamental. You knew this. I mean, you probably knew this, but it's things very, very important to show it in a graph, to see how that curve goes progressively down. You will probably tell me, yeah, but when you reach 25, 40 or more than 40, actually the amount is actually starting to go up. And in theory, it should be going down. Yes, in theory, but actually what we are reflecting here are the inherent diseconomies of scale. Those airports have not invested, and time has been going by to dilute that cost over the passengers, okay? So that is why we see these economies of scale. Once those airports grow and actually build, their capacity, the unit cost should come down. Okay. Now, and this is actually for those of you who have done economics, you're probably familiar with the long-run average cost curve. Okay, and that's what it is. It's exactly what I was showing you before. In the long term, unit costs go down. And in the short term, actually unit costs go down until a point where there starts to appear diseconomies of scale. And what we were seeing in the previous graph for the 40 plus million passengers airports is that diseconomies of scale that you see in the last red curve, the curve on the right, starting to go up. Okay, we actually haven't made change to the next level of airport size, okay? Because in the long run, we will see it going down, okay? Very important slide too, for you to be aware.
Rafael, sorry to interrupt you, it's 9:43 just
for you to very know. Good, yeah. So we are going to finish in a moment, okay? So I'll skip this one. So, because we're almost done. So we talked about revenues, we talked about costs. So where is the break-even point? So the break-even point, in other words, the point at which airports should be, or on average, start making money, is somewhere between 1-3 million passengers, depending on the characteristics of each airport. But an airport with more than 3 million passengers should be making money, okay? Or should be. I mean, should is perhaps a bit too big of a word, but on average around the world, that tells you that an airport should be a very interesting investment. Okay. Now, so last poll. Okay. Go ahead. Okay. Yeah, last poll, and we're almost done, guys.
Sorry, let me money here.
So, okay. Do most airports make money? What do you think? Wow. Seems that you work at airports. All right.
Okay, we have 24. I will end it here and share the results.
All right, so let's see. What's the story? Okay, very good. So let's go down. and see the last slides in the presentation. Okay, here we are. So we have a very interesting industry paradox in the airport industry. These are the revenues for the world total. These are the costs, and it's telling us basically that indeed the industry, as an industry, airports make money. Very interesting. But if we look at each individual airport, we see that 67% of the world's airports lose money. And they lose money because most airports are small. And as you can see, of that loss, of that 67%, is made up 93% airports with less than 1 million passengers. And that is because of the very high unit cost that I was showing you in that curve. Okay, so that's what we call the industry paradox. The industry, the airport industry, makes money, but most airports make a loss. So that's all that we wanted to share with you today. We wanted to make it 45 minutes. It's 46 minutes. I don't know, Francisco, if you want to share with the audience the address where you can actually send your questions. So as we say, you know, if you want to have any questions, if you want to make any suggestions on any of these very broad topics that we cover very quickly today, please send it to us and we'll be very happy to answer. As I say, any particular issues that you would like us to look into greater detail, be it the characteristics of the demand or the drivers of demand, costs, revenues, economic regulation, very, very hot topic. And by the way, it is one of the topics that probably, you know, will somehow change as a result of COVID. Okay, we have been sharing with your airports, you know, the situation with the traffic in Latin America right now. You know that we are, you know, we've lost more than 95% of the traffic so far. Sorry, in the last couple of months. Okay, we expect that we will lose at least 50% of the traffic losses. We will less than $5,000 billion as compared to last year's in revenues. Very dramatic situation. Please keep on following us on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on our website, and please let us know how we can help you. Send the questions and suggest topics, and we will actually cover them in greater detail. Thank you very much for your time, and until the next. Bye.